Good afternoon, everybody, and welcome to this sixth webinar in Sills and Betterage's series for anybody going through a separation or divorce. In this session, we're going to talk about how you create a great team around you, whatever your circumstances. So, divorce is commonly accepted now as one of the most stressful and traumatic life events that you might go through. It's not just a legal process, it's an emotional and a financial journey too. It's emotionally challenging, and how you approach it can have a huge effect on your stress levels, your costs, and your health. The financial decisions you make now can affect the rest of your life. So today we're going to show you how to create a really good team around you so that you are taken care of legally, emotionally, and financially. My name is Claire Macklin. I'm a breakup and divorce coach. I've got over 7 years experience of coaching clients through divorce. Been divorced myself twice, once not through my choice, and the second time I chose to go through the process. And I work as a trusted partner with clients to help them navigate their way through divorce and beyond. I'm also the author of a book, Breakup from Crisis to Confidence. And I'm going to ask now Dominic and Ben to introduce themselves too. Dominic.
Hi, good afternoon, everyone. Yes, I'm Dominic. I'm Dominic Lee. I'm a partner in the family team at Sills and Betterage, and I'm a solicitor specialising in family law, divorce law. I've been doing it for around 8 years and helping my clients to navigate the legal consequences of their divorce and separation and coming through on the other side of that.
Thank you. And Ben?
Hi, good afternoon, everyone. Thank you for joining us. My name is Ben Slater. I'm a chartered financial planner and director of my own company. I've been in the industry for 12 years and I work with a whole range of clients. One thing they all have in common is that they want to achieve some financial peace of mind, and we help them really build a plan for the future.
Thank you very much. So just a little bit of housekeeping before we get into the content. We will take some questions at the end of our presentations. If you would like to ask a question, please use the chat function on the webinar and just check that you click the box that says you can ask your question anonymously so that your name doesn't appear for everybody to see. So why is creating a team so important? Well, going through a divorce it really is a marathon, not a sprint. And you're going to need different support at different times, depending on where you are in the journey, whether it was your choice to go on this journey or not, how you feel, how your ex approaches the process, and lots of other factors too. No two separations are ever the same. So creating a team of experts around you to provide guidance that's tailored to you and your circumstances will enable you to achieve the best outcome possible, legally, financially, and emotionally. You'll have the right people at the right time for the right thing. So today we're going to use a case study to highlight some of the areas in which we can all assist at different stages through the process. So we are looking at a couple, Rebecca and Gary. Rebecca is 40, she's a part-time teaching assistant. Gary is 47 and he's the owner of a high-end car sales business. They met in 2009 and married in 2012, and they have one son, Samuel, who's 10. Rebecca and Gary live in a jointly owned home. They don't have a mortgage on their home. They also have a jointly owned rental property nearby, and they do have a mortgage on that. Rebecca has a small pension pot and Gary has a much larger pension from his business. They also have some ISA savings and some investments. We're going to talk about 4 different stages in Rebecca and Gary's separation and divorce. First of all, before. Secondly, making the application and going through disclosure of assets, then negotiations, and then afterwards, the future. So scene 1, the beginning. So our story starts when Rebecca contacts me because she's unhappy and she isn't sure that she wants to stay with Gary. She says that she's always tense and that Gary's quite unkind to her. She's scared of telling Gary that she wants to leave him because she's worried about how angry he might get. When she does something that he doesn't like, he sometimes shouts at her and then often ignores her for a few days. She did mention divorce, she says, a few years ago, and Gary said that if she left him, he would make it really difficult for her, and she feels that she's walking on eggshells. She's also scared because she doesn't know how she would survive if she did leave him, as Gary's always run their finances. She knows there are savings and he has a pension, but she's never been the one in charge of the money and she doesn't know how much is there. The income that she earns from her teaching assistant's job pays for their summer holiday, and then Rebecca's worried that she wouldn't be able to manage on her salary alone. She's also worried about how they're going to share care of Samuel. She's always been able to do the school runs, and she's really concerned about how she and Gary will tell Samuel about the split and how he might be affected by it. So first of all, from my perspective, this story reflects lots of concerns that many of my clients have when they first come and talk to me, in particular the financial fears that Rebecca's got and the worry about the impact on her children. So my initial sessions with Rebecca are likely to cover things like, first of all, who's in her support network. So this isn't just the three of us and the roles that we play, but it's also her family, her friends. We will probably talk about who her radiator friends are. So who are her friends who help to lift her up, who support her, who are always there, who might be her 3 a.m. friend. So when it's really tricky in the middle of the night, who will she be able to call if she needs to? And we'll also identify probably who the drain people in her life are, because those are the people who kind of suck your energy. They're perhaps only interested in gossiping. They're only interested in order to make themselves feel better, perhaps. And those are the people that Rebecca probably wants to avoid. So quite often I'll create with my clients a kind of circle of their inner core people, and then the next people out, the next people out, the next people out. And there might also be people that she's thinking of for practical support, for example, with Samuel, or if the car breaks down, or those kinds of things. Now, divorce is an alien process to most people. So I would be talking to Rebecca about talking to a solicitor to help her understand the legal process. And I would introduce her to Dom. And I'd also introduce her very early on to Ben, so that she can get to know him, so that he can support her on the financial side, because knowledge is power. We would also probably talk about the coercive nature of some of Gary's behaviour. I would be helping Rebecca perhaps to rehearse what she wants to say to Gary. I would be talking to her about having backup options, about staying safe in her communication with Gary. We would also talk about strategies to support her in face-to-face communication with Gary throughout the process. And we'll come to that again a bit later. But sometimes clients come to me and they describe the kind of situation that Rebecca's in, and they don't really realise that this is coercive. And so we would talk about that probably quite a lot. And then there's talking about Samuel. So we would talk about how to talk to Samuel, how to make sure that Rebecca is listening to Samuel as well. Rebecca has told me that she's afraid that leaving Gary will damage Samuel in some way as well. So we will also probably talk about what Sam is learning at the moment about relationships by watching her and Gary's relationship. Because Rebecca's really clear that she wouldn't want Samuel to be in a relationship like hers and Gary's when he's older. We'd also think about perhaps what he might learn from their breakup. For example, that it's okay to walk away from a relationship in which you're not happy and in which you feel you're walking on eggshells. It will also show him perhaps how to deal with challenges, how to rebuild, how to cope with change. So I'll help Rebecca to shift the narrative about separation and Samuel in her mind. And then lastly, we will probably talk about intention. So how does Rebecca want to be during this process? What does she perhaps want her relationship with Gary to look like afterwards, both as her ex-husband and as co-parent with Samuel, because those now are going to become different relationships for her to consider. There will probably be lots more, but those are some of the main things that at that point in time, Rebecca and I will probably be spending some time talking about. So Dom, once I've given Rebecca your details and she gets in touch with you, what advice will you be giving her?
Yeah, so firstly, Rebecca may not have ever had to instruct a solicitor before, and it could be quite a daunting process for her. So if she's already had a conversation with you, Claire, you've probably been able to arm her with some information about what to expect from somebody like me, and perhaps help to keep focused on what are the key questions that Rebecca wants answering during that initial meeting for me. So I would typically meet with Rebecca face to face. Oh, sorry, the lights have just gone off in my room. There you go. I typically meet with her face to face, and I would be really clear with Rebecca about what my role as a divorce solicitor is and what exactly I can help Rebecca with. And it would all be initially a bit what you touched on, Claire, is the knowledge is power. So during that first meeting with Rebecca, I would be advising her of, how the finances on divorce, if she does proceed with divorce, how would they be sorted? Some people and a lot of people don't realise that on divorce, that the finances, if there is pensions, they can be shared. What happens with property? A lot of people don't understand that there are financial claims that can be sorted out on divorce. So it would be really giving Rebecca that information so that she can make an informed decision about moving forward. Also during that meeting, Claire, I normally take quite a lot of background information from Rebecca, so that I can start to build a picture of Rebecca's life, Samuel's life, and Gary's life, and how they work their finances, so that if and when Rebecca is ready to move forward in the future, that I've already got the key information to help her do that, so that I'm not having to go over old ground. And also during that first meeting, I think this is an anxiety that I understandably come across quite a lot. Rebecca's worried about Gary's reaction. She's worried about, what if Gary starts to turn off the financial tap if this is the end of the relationship. And that's where we would talk about legal responsibilities and obligations. So there is a legal obligation to maintain your spouse, and that can be enforced ultimately if a sensible way forward can't be found. So again, it's about empowering Rebecca with that knowledge and information. And I'd be working quite closely with you, Claire, during that those early stages, because whilst I'm best placed to help Rebecca understand the legal consequences and the legal process and the different options open to Rebecca to trying to sort out her finances with Gary, I'm not best placed to do what you do, which is helping her to, in her mind, build that close circle of trusted individuals and really looking after herself during this process as well. And that's why the longer I've been practicing, the more I realize my own limitations, and that it's all about creating a team around Rebecca to help her through this difficult and alien time in her life, essentially.
And we would one of the other things that we would do is talk to Rebecca about giving consent for us all to talk to each other.
Absolutely.
Because actually probably one thing that Rebecca doesn't need is to have to explain where she's at each time she meets one of us to update us all. So if we can keep each other up to date about exactly where Rebecca is at any one point in time, that will also be really helpful for her.
Just sorry, Claire, just to add as well, I think you raised your concerns that there might be a coercive relationship here between Rebecca and Gary, and that is something that I would sort of speak to Rebecca about, again, in terms of legal options. What if Gary's behaviour deteriorates? What if the abuse gets worse? What legal steps can she take? It's unclear at this stage, in the scenario we've described, whether additional steps would be necessary. But I would be talking to her about, the option of a warning letter to Gary about his behaviour if it didn't improve or got worse, or the option ultimately of something called a non-molestation order if his behaviour, God forbid, got worse and either she or Samuel were at risk of suffering, further harm. So that is also a conversation, I think, to be had at quite an early stage with Rebecca.
Absolutely. Thank you. And Ben, at this stage, what's your involvement?
Yeah, so as you've both already alluded to, Rebecca's really going to have a lot on her plate. It's probably going to be quite overwhelmed with everything that's happening. So we'll probably have quite limited involvement at this stage. It's more about yourselves making an introduction to us as another professional that she can rely on and answer any concerns or questions she might have initially. we will probably meet with her, but very briefly. And again, we probably won't go into too much detail about finances and options at this stage. It's really just to make sure she's got another person that she can have on her team, so to speak. Sometimes we'll get clients and Rebecca to start thinking about her numbers, and what life could cost her individually. She may not have ever given that any thought, but we'll really move at a pace that she's comfortable with, and that will really vary depending on the client and how quickly they want to proceed. I'd probably say we'll have more involvement with yourselves, answering any questions you guys have about different assets that Gary and Rebecca may have, and it's really make sure that Rebecca's happy with us and can put a face to a name at this stage.
So it's all about building relationships at this point for you, isn't it, Ben?
Absolutely, yeah. We don't so overwhelm her with another set of financial issues or things to be thinking about. Really, it's about her understanding her options at this stage from yourselves, and just make sure she's got the right guys on her side.
Thank you. So moving into scene 2. So Rebecca's now decided to apply for a divorce, and the application's been made online. She and Gary are living in the house together still, although he has moved into the spare room. Rebecca's worried about how they're going to divide their finances. Gary said that there's no need to value the business, as that's something that he's built up on his own. And when Rebecca asked him about his pension, he said, "But I worked for that and it isn't yours." It's quite tense between Rebecca and Gary at home, and sometimes that upsets Samuel. So first of all, Dom, what's your advice at this stage?
So I'd expect that I'd be quite heavily involved at this stage, because Rebecca's she'll want an idea about how the assets are going to be divided. She's being told certain things from Gary, and she'll want to understand, is that correct? Is Gary right when he says I won't need to value my business? The fundamental work that I'd be helping Rebecca with is helping her and Gary to exchange their financial disclosure. Their spouses, if the marriage has broken down, they both owe a duty of full and frank financial disclosure to each other. So in this stage, we would be looking to progress that. Essentially, Rebecca would fill out a form which gives an overview of her financial position, and Gary would be expected to do the same as well. So at this stage, we are getting more into the nuts and bolts of how Gary runs his finances, how Rebecca's been running her finances, and what the value of Gary's business might be. Because whilst Gary says that there's no need to value the business, we normally would need to get a valuation of a business. Sometimes if it's a profitable large business, that does mean engaging a forensic accountant to do a valuation report of the business. Other times, if it's not so big, we might ask the company accountant to do a valuation. As well as helping Rebecca get a much better idea of what the value of the assets are. When I say the value of assets, we would also want to include pensions as well. I get the sense here that Gary's might be a bit reluctant to provide information about his pension, and realistically, often pension assets between spouses can sometimes be the most valuable asset, or the second most valuable asset. And it sounds in these circumstances that Rebecca's probably sacrificed her own career, perhaps childcare responsibilities. Gary's been able to build a lucrative, a valuable pension provision of his own, and it's really arming Rebecca with the best legal advice that she is entitled to a share of the pension on divorce and shouldn't be penalised because of the different but equally important contributions she made to the welfare of the family. I would hope that Gary would engage with providing his financial disclosure. If he doesn't, and again, he sounds like he could be a bit of a tricky customer, I'd be advising Rebecca about what other steps that we can take to ultimately compel the disclosure that we need from Gary, which ultimately there is a court process if somebody is just refusing to give their financial disclosure. And I'd also be advising Rebecca at this stage, because I imagine that we'd be starting to build a much clearer picture of Gary's financial position. So I'd be advising her on what a potential settlement and financial future could look like as well.
Brilliant. And that's then where you come in with a bit more detail too. So Ben, what's your involvement right now?
Yeah, so we'll probably now sit down and have a much more formal meeting with the client. And along with what Dominic's already provided, the client, we'll talk a lot more about education and coaching on the various financial products. You know, again, as Dominic alluded to, how valuable a pension can be for Rebecca, why she shouldn't forego her right to a potential pension share. And also discuss things such as mortgages and ISAs, bank accounts, basically give her guidance on the whole financial mix to make sure she understands how valuable they can be individually. We want to also now understand her concerns financially and help to address these. And the way we do that is we use the financial information that Dominic's managed to get from Rebecca and Gary and start to build something called a cash flow plan and start to give Rebecca some confidence as to what her future could look like if she were to go alone, really. Again, at this stage, the numbers might not be final, but it's just about giving Rebecca some confidence. We also want to give Rebecca times that she can review her sort of expenditure figures, review her assets, and make sure that all the numbers are accurate. Because, of course, she's not just got herself, but she's also got Samuel to think about. We probably won't go into too much detail about investments and how you can invest your money in the pensions and ISAs at this stage. I think that's more for the next stage. It's really about a bigger picture overview and trying to give her some confidence about how positive her position might look. Potentially, we could also make another referral, which might be to a mortgage advisor. So I know they've got no mortgage on the family home at the moment, but it might be something that Rebecca needs to consider in the future to give her that immediate cash flow to keep living the lifestyle she wants to live. So it's about making sure Rebecca's aware of the value of the marital assets and her options, and trying to really provide her with some confidence so she can move forward.
Thank you very much. This part of the process emotionally is often really difficult for people to manage. Emotions are probably running really high. It can be really, really tense at home. One of the most fundamental things that I talk about with pretty much every client I see is about what you can and what you can't control. So what you can and can't control here. So in the middle of this diagram is what I call the blue circle of power. This is where you have control. This is what you have control over. So you have control over your words, your behavior, your feelings, reactions, thoughts, ideas, body language, all of those things. If you focus on those things, that's where you're staying in the zone of power and where you can exert most influence. The minute that you start to step outside of that, and I see this in, for example, Rebecca might be saying things like, well, how do I make Gary behave differently? How do I get him to understand my perspective? At that point, she's stepping into what I would call this yellow zone. It's the yellow zone of frustration, because you can't control other people's words, other people's behaviors, other people's actions, decisions, ideas. So she can't make Gary into a different person. She can't get him to understand anything. She can explain, but she can't control whether he gets it or understands or hears her. So what I do with all my clients is help them to focus on staying in that blue zone and thinking about what it is that they can control rather than trying to focus on things that they can't, because that way is just frustration, anger, and so on. So in sessions, I would be talking with Rebecca around what she can and can't control, where to put her focus. I'm providing at this point in time a safe space for her to offload as well, to offload her worries, her stresses, her concerns. We might also discuss the advice that Dom is giving so that she can work out her priorities and how she feels about it, because he will be giving her choices. So we will talk those choices through. We'll also talk about the importance of taking care of herself, because this is absolutely within her control to do. When you're going through a separation or divorce, you can spend a lot of time in fight, flight, freeze, anxiety mode. So I would be teaching her some breathing strategies. Probably I'd be encouraging her to use perhaps some meditation or some apps like Headspace. I'd be talking about the importance of her friends, of exercise, of making sure that she's eating all right. If she can't, for example, eat 3 meals a day because she's too stressed, eating little and often. We would be talking about doing one thing every day that helps her to feel better and that is kind to herself. And we might be talking about how she's talking to herself in her own mind as well. So strategies to stay calm and to soothe the stress in her mind and body. This is also a stage where the intention that we talked about earlier is really important. So Rebecca's intentions with who she wants to be. If, for example, Rebecca has decided that she wants to be dignified at all times, then I will help her to remember that so that she can talk to herself whenever she's about to do something and ask herself, is what I'm about to do or say going to help me to stay dignified, or is it going to take me further away from that? I'll also be working with Rebecca around some of Gary's responses and helping her to understand that it isn't greedy to ask for a share of his pension. I'll be helping her with some responses to some of his comments as well. For example, to say, you know, this is a process. We're following a process here. It isn't unamicable for me to ask questions or ask for information or take advice or even challenge him at times. Ultimately, you can't know what's fair, and neither can the court, without clarity about what's in the joint pot. And that's why this process of disclosure is so important. And we would probably also be talking about strategies to handle living in the house together while they go through this process. So, for example, do they have a separate space each that they can go to where they both respect that that's the other space? They might be wanting to start to divide their time with Samuel already. And I'd be talking with Rebecca about what boundaries perhaps she wants to suggest, what's okay for her and what isn't okay. What is Gary's behaviour looking like at the moment, and what can she do in order to protect herself? We'd also talk perhaps about Samuel and answering his questions. So active listening, not promising answers that you don't have, also staying upbeat. So he will follow their lead. And he will follow Rebecca's lead, even if Gary is, is being very difficult. So we will talk about all of those things. And throughout all of this, Dom and Ben and I will be in contact with each other so that Rebecca feels really supported in making all of these decisions that are in front of her. So that's scene 2. Then scene 3 is the negotiation. So Gary has said that he'd like to sit down with Rebecca and sort out their finances. He says he's created a spreadsheet of all of their bank accounts, all of their savings and ISAs, and he's put a proposal to Rebecca. Essentially, the proposal has 4 elements. Rebecca can stay in the family home. Gary will take the rental property and move in once the tenants have moved out. He's suggesting they divide all their savings 50-50. And in return for Rebecca getting the family home, Gary says he'll keep his pension and ownership of the business. And Rebecca isn't sure what to do. When she said that she'd need to run the proposal past her solicitor, Gary said that that wouldn't be necessary because he'd made sure it was all fair. And he said if Rebecca took it to a solicitor, it would all get very nasty and argumentative, that it would waste a lot of money. He said also that Rebecca had spent enough money taking advice from Dom and from seeing me for support. So Dom, there's a lot there. What options are there for Rebecca and Gary to start to agree their finances or negotiate around their finances?
So there's not a one route only in this situation. It is open to Rebecca and Gary. It sort of depends on the dynamic between them. And I know we've noted our concern before about the dynamic, but it is open to them to reach an agreement between themselves and then come to a solicitor and say, we'd like this drawn up, please. Now, if Rebecca did that, I would want to advise her on, the merits legally of what's being discussed. And I think, without getting into the detail here, just on the face of it, there would be a couple of concerns potentially about what Gary's proposed. And part of my role is, helping to advise Rebecca on, is this legally a fair and appropriate outcome? Because if we boil down the law, it's really about achieving a fair outcome that meets both parties' needs and the needs of any children. So I'd be helping her with that analysis. may be that she and Gary can come to an agreement between themselves. It may be, and this is an option and a decision for Rebecca to make, that she wants to instruct me to take the lead with a negotiation. So I assume at this stage that we've pretty much got the numbers on what the value of the pensions are, what the value of the business is, and then I could engage in negotiating with Gary, or if he instructs a lawyer, with his lawyer about a financial settlement. And that's quite a traditional way of dealing with a settlement. There would typically be letters back and forth, or it might be that we can convene a joint meeting, sometimes called a round table meeting. And again, whether that's appropriate is it completely depends on the circumstances of my client. If there has been domestic abuse, if there is a coercive relationship, then being sat in the same room as each other is probably not going to be helpful. But if we assume that it is viable, we could hold a roundtable meeting whereby there's negotiations between me and Gary's solicitor. Or another option that I'd be discussing with Rebecca is that I could advise her in the background about what Gary's has proposed and whether it's fair, what aspects might not be fair, what a potential counteroffer could look like. But she and Gary, if they're willing to, could engage with a mediation process as an alternative to instructing me to negotiate on Rebecca's behalf. And that mediation process, it's not about couples counselling. It's about appointing an independent professional as the mediator. They're impartial. They won't act for, they're not on Gary's side. They're not on Rebecca's side. They are neutral. And their role is to try and help Rebecca and Gary have those difficult conversations about what should happen with the property, what should happen with the business. And actually, that can be a very constructive, and it can be a more cost-efficient way of separated spouses, discussing a financial settlement. It might not be that they can solve everything in the mediation, but even if some of the points can be agreed, that would be really good. And then, Rebecca could come back to me if there was a issue outstanding in respect of Gary's pension, for example. So there is a lot of different options. There is also, there's a timer on this light which keeps putting me in the dark. There is also, and I do normally describe it as a last resort, there is a court process to resolving a financial settlement. It's not a process to start lightly, but ultimately, if somebody is not being fair, they've put forward ridiculous proposals and we've tried to mediate, or they're still not disclosing information, or they're doing dodgy things, selling assets, transferring money abroad, okay, there is a court process, which sometimes is a necessary evil, but we try normally to avoid that if we can. So that's what I'd be working on with Rebecca at this stage.
Thank you. Really clear. From my perspective, I would be helping Rebecca in the background in terms of preparing for those meetings, preparing for mediation, perhaps preparing for court, so that she feels emotionally strong enough to go into those meetings and to go into those environments and hold her own. I would also be talking with Rebecca about strategies for her to stay calm in the face of some of the things that Gary's perhaps saying to her, and his worries that it will become too argumentative with lawyers involved. Also, I find one thing that a lot of my clients worry about at this point is the stress of these emails popping into their inbox. The inbox pops in, your phone pings, what is it? What is it? Mm-hmm. So some strategies where you can stay in control of that can be really helpful. So, for example, you might turn off your notifications on your emails, and then once you go, so then you can choose when you're going in to look at them, and then filing everything into perhaps a separate folder so you can't see it all the time. You might perhaps archive your ex's messages on WhatsApp and then just go and look at them once or twice a day, for example. Another one is to leave anything that makes you feel angry when you open it up, or upset when you open it up, or gives you a really strong emotional reaction. Leave it for 24 hours before you reply. the 24-hour rule, I call this. Unless you absolutely have to, don't reply for 24 hours, because that gives you a chance for your brain to process what the email has said, or the letter has said, and it gives you a chance to sleep on it. Your brain will process during that time. And it's quite interesting to see after 24 hours, sometimes you come back to an email and you see something totally different in it. And I might also be thinking with Rebecca about what she says in her responses. So she can choose when she responds to things, how she responds to things, and even if she responds to things. And I call this discretionary engagement with my clients. So it helps Rebecca to take back a feeling of control over her side of communication, which is really important at this point. So that would also help Rebecca not to get into kind of an emotional tit for tat email exchange, WhatsApp exchange, text exchange with Gary, which is really stressful and can really increase conflict and therefore cost.
I was going to say, Claire, actually, that can increase costs. And actually, what I've seen from how you help people is to use my time more efficiently as well. Because actually, if Rebecca's getting messages from Gary and then immediately reacting by forwarding them to me, which sometimes is appropriate, don't get me wrong, if there's a risk to her and we need to act urgently, then that's absolutely fine. But actually, if you could help Rebecca really focus on, help her with strategies of how best, to communicate with me, what exact questions does she have? If she's received a barrage of messages from Gary mentioning the business, but mentioning also the family dog, and you can help her to understand what are the key bits from this that I need advice from Dominic, on, and that can help her use my time the most valuable way for her without racking up lots of costs, forwarding lots of emails essentially.
Yeah, absolutely. And there's a few other little tips around that as well, in terms of, rather than sending 5 emails over the course of a day, save them all up. Start drafting your email with each one, save them all up, just send one email. Because that means you only have to look at one email. And examples of how to use her time with you more effectively can be really helpful. The other thing is that sometimes if you start writing the email at 9 o'clock in the morning, by 5 o'clock in the afternoon, you might find you've already answered the first question.
Yeah, precisely.
Or the situation has shifted and changed.
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah, so that's really helpful.
Ben, at this point, I think you'll probably be a bit more involved than you were at the previous 2 stages. So could you explain to us what your role is at this stage?
Yeah, absolutely. So again, throughout stage 1, 2, and 3, Rebecca's going to have a lot of stress on the plate already, and we don't really want to add to that stress. It's really just giving her a high-level overview as to how the future might look. But during stage 3, we can actually give her more specific numbers and details. So again, working with Dominic and yourself, Claire, we'll use the numbers from the potential settlements and the disclosure documents. And we'll also use the numbers for expenditure from a budget planner that we would have sent Rebecca previously to fill out. This will then show her what her immediate future will look like. And it might also help during the negotiations to understand more about her essential spending and what she does need to live on, to also look after Samuel. And again, Dominic and I will be discussing that together. So we'll put the numbers into our forecasting software. It will show her what the options could look like for her financially. And we'll start discussing short, medium and long-term needs at this point in time. So most clients have a tendency to focus on the short-term needs. Am I going to be okay initially? Am I going to have enough money in the bank and enough income to keep doing what I'm doing? We'll try and get to focus a bit more about medium and longer term planning as well, which is where pensions and other investments may come into the mix, and mortgages, more importantly. We'll hopefully try and give us some confidence around things like taking on mortgage debt, about investing a pension into the financial markets and taking some risk, and really sort of demonstrate that if she makes these changes, it will have a positive impact on her position. Again, clients may not have ever invested in financial markets before. It can be quite a daunting prospect. We just want to really simplify things and give her confidence and peace of mind that she will be okay. We still probably won't make any big decisions at this point in time, I must say. So it'll still probably be overviews until everything's settled and finalised. We won't really give any formal advice, but it's just trying to give a bit more clarity. And I know, Dominic, we've worked in the past on these cash flow plans with clients, and they found them quite valuable because it just shows in a nice graph format that actually they are going to be okay immediately and in the future. And that's really what we want to do.
Just to give another example as well, so Rebecca and Gary, if Gary wants to keep the business, and again, we're not going to talk about figures here, there may be a trade-off. So it sounds like Gary's brought in more money to the family because of, they've contributed in different ways. It might be that beyond the divorce, Rebecca has a need for some ongoing help from Gary on a monthly basis. Okay. Now, it is possible to, instead of having a monthly payment, to capitalize that as a lump sum. And there's software that I know Ben's got where we can do the calculations. If Rebecca was to receive a lump sum of X amount instead of having an ongoing monthly payment from Gary, because that way, if there is an ongoing monthly payment, it's not a proper clean break between the two of them. So often, it's not always the case, but often there is a lot to be said for capitalizing that and having a lump sum instead. And then Ben can run figures to show with a lump sum of X, assuming an interest rate of, lots of different factors it can assume, how much could I draw down in income and how long would that last me? So that's a bit more technical analysis that Ben, you and I have worked on before and can do moving forward.
There's an emotional aspect to that as well, I think, where if Rebecca has ongoing spousal maintenance from Gary, she still has to chase him if he misses a payment. All of those things, which actually can cause further stress down the line.
Absolutely. Yeah. And uncertainty. There's a lot to be said for having that certainty of a capitalized sum. Now, it's not always possible, but it might be here in this scenario.
Yeah,
definitely. Absolutely. And Rebecca's only 40 and Samuel's 10, so there's many years that she's going to need to look after Samuel, and many years before she potentially retires. So what we'll be able to do with the software is build different scenarios. If you did nothing and kept it all in the bank, this is what your position looked like. But actually, if you do engage with someone like ourselves, and we recommend more tax efficient ways of investing your money, trying to get a better return for you, this is the benefit. And again, if things are getting quite difficult during the negotiation stage, it'll just give Rebecca that confidence that actually what's being proposed might be enough, and she'll be able to do exactly what she and Samuel need to do.
Yeah.
Brilliant. So scene 4 is the divorce is ending and on into the future. So Rebecca and Gary at this stage did manage to agree financial division through negotiation through their solicitors. So their settlement included a pension share, and also some capitalised spousal maintenance, as Dom was just describing, for Rebecca, so that she can support herself ongoing. Gary's moved into the rental property, and Samuel is going to spend every other weekend from Friday after school to Wednesday morning with him, and Rebecca is staying in the old marital home. So Dom, at this point, what is there left for you to do?
So at this point, it's a case of formalising the agreement that's been reached. So it's good, they've reached an agreement. It must be formalised within a binding document that is called a consent order. Because they've reached an agreement, without the need to involve a judge, they can enter into a court order by consent. That can sometimes be, quite a technical legal document. So I would recommend that Rebecca takes advice on having a consent order drafted. And it's then sent to a judge on a paperwork basis. So there's ordinarily no need to actually attend a court hearing, sent to a judge to be considered and hopefully approved. And it is important that it is formalized, because that stops people, in theory, going back on what they've agreed to do. And it means that things can be enforced if necessary. So if, for example, Gary later has a change of heart and says, actually, I'm not going to share my pension. Well, if we've already got a court order, he's not going to be able to do that. So that's the main focus of my work at this stage. We'd also be probably finalizing the divorce once the order's been sort of implemented. So yeah, that's my involvement at this point.
Brilliant, thank you. And my work with Rebecca at this point continues beyond the point at which Dom's involvement probably finishes. So I would be working then with Rebecca at this point to help her plan what her new life looks like. This is a really exciting part of the work that I do with clients. And often it's when clients realise that they might be able to realise some of the dreams that they perhaps have let go of in their relationship. So we would talk about things like values. What's important to Rebecca? What does she want her life to be built around? What does her co-parenting relationship with Gary look like? What kind of strategies can she use to make sure from her perspective that she's doing the best she can? We probably talk about role modeling in terms of Samuel as well, because even if Gary, for example, doesn't behave in the way that Rebecca would want to, she can still role model really good behaviour to Samuel so that he can learn from her. We'd also probably spend some time looking back over her relationship with Gary, perhaps thinking about patterns in the relationship, but also patterns in her own behaviour, perhaps that she would like to change. Were there signs early on, red flags early on, that she perhaps spotted and didn't do anything about or ignored? Would she like to behave differently if she ever went into a new relationship? How would she like to show up differently? So we'd probably talk about dating, boundaries, what a healthy relationship looks like, where she might have sacrificed rather than compromised in her relationship with Gary, and how she can use that learning to do something differently going forward. Ben, at this point, where do you get involved in terms of implementation of the settlement that they've reached?
Yeah, so this is the stage we'll probably go into a lot more detail. So divorce has been finalised, maybe a pension share and a lump of cash that Rebecca needs to do something with. So we'll sit down and provide some education on the investment options for the capital that she may have received, and also how to invest her pension share. Again, we'll focus back on short, medium and long-term needs. We want to make sure she's got enough money immediately before we then start to talk about investing her pensions and other potential ISAs and investments as well. So referrals to a mortgage broker might be finalised at this point as well. So it might be actually best that Rebecca does take out a mortgage facility to give herself a bit more capital initially, and we'll set up the pension and agree a level of risk that's suitable for her. It's really about finalising that initial plan. So we've been through all of the negotiations. It's now certain what Rebecca's going to have. We'll build a plan based on that and give her confidence that it will look positive. Talk more about risk and the importance of taking risk to generate future income. 9 times out of 10, we want to engage in an ongoing relationship with Rebecca as well. So we don't just want to set up a load of financial products and leave Rebecca to it. We want to set up the products, but also give her bespoke sort of planning, almost coaching on an ongoing basis, because life changes. Some years are going to be better than others. And we just want to make sure that Rebecca knows each year that she is in that positive position.
Yeah, this is where your work and my work really start to massively overlap as well, I think, in terms of thinking about values, purpose for Rebecca's money, what she wants life to look like in 1 year, 5 year, 10 years, and so on. Yeah. So I hope that's given people watching a really good idea of how we kind of interact for Rebecca throughout this process. We do have some questions, which I'd like to run through now, and then we've got a little bit of advice about how you can choose the members of your team. So if we go to the questions first, because I want to make sure that we get that done. So the first question that's come up is, how deep can the legal team dig to get full financial disclosure? Can you do a forensic audit? And does it include accounts that are hidden and money that's been hidden perhaps or squirreled away? And what might the costs be of this? This might include another referral out, I imagine.
Yeah. So the key word will be proportionality. So, if we've got most of the information, there's a little bit missing. We'll always need to weigh up what are the benefits or what are the legal costs versus trying to pin down exactly 100% of the information. So that's the first consideration. If some material information hasn't been disclosed, then we can do quite a lot of digging. So we would try to deal with it voluntarily, so putting pressure on through correspondence. But ultimately, if, for example, Gary's not going to give any information about the business and the value and how it operates, ultimately, court can intervene. So court proceedings can start. Within the court proceedings, the pressure increases because there's more of an over obligation to provide disclosure. So that normally does the trick. If it's still not working and Gary's flat out refusing to give any information about the business, then the court can make what's called a third party disclosure order. So it can order a third party, i.e. the business or a pension fund or an employer to disclose the information that is required. Or it can even join a separate person or entity to the court proceedings. So Gary's business could, if necessary, be joined to the court proceedings, and then the court can extract and compel disclosure that way. It's also going to be potentially a contempt of court issue. So if someone's flat out refusing to do something they've been ordered, that includes the business if it's been joined as a party to the proceedings, Gary could be at risk of being in contempt of court. And whilst it's rare, there are cases, it does happen, where people do end up in prison for not giving financial disclosure. So that's how serious it can get. On an audit level, again, key word here is proportionality. If we've got a one-man band, it's not going to be proportionate to get a forensic accountant involved to value his business potentially. If it is quite a valuable business and we think there's been some shenanigans going on, then we can get a forensic accountant instructed, again, if that's not agreed voluntarily, with an order of the court, and they can do a more detailed audit of the goings on with the business. I think it's important to say that there's not a silver bullet to this. So there are, up and down the country every day, there are people who hide assets, and there are people who get away with hiding assets. It's about taking the steps that we can take proportionately, not going unnecessarily down rabbit holes. But ultimately, some people, they do get away with hiding assets because it might not be worth the legal costs of pursuing a particular bank account, for example. But ordinarily, in my experience, once the court's involved, 98 times out of 100, you get a clear financial position.
This has happened a few times with clients of mine, where actually quite often I will have a discussion with that client about whether it's worth it also on an emotional level to pursue some of those options, especially if then with Ben we can show the client that life is going to be okay, that they're going to be right. Sometimes clients will decide it's not worth the emotional strain and stress of taking
absolutely
those steps.
Clear. Absolutely. That's why it is keyword proportionality and managing expectations. There's always a trade-off. Sometimes it is proportionate to start court proceedings because there's a valuable pension and we've got no information about it. Sometimes there has to be that trade-off, and it's a difficult call, and only Rebecca could make that call after properly considering it. Do I want to go through that? Is it worth it? Or am I going to be okay on what there is, what we know about? Those are the tough decisions and tough conversations that I have every day with people, essentially.
Yeah. So the next question is sort of related. So one of our listeners has friends who've struggled to get information, especially from an ex who's self-employed, like Gary is. What is the process, just very briefly?
So the first process is to request it on a voluntary basis. All right, let's get the light back on. If that's not working, to engage a solicitor to put pressure on, to warn that person that they're at risk of a cost order being made against them if we're forced to start court proceedings to compel the disclosure, giving them notice of that, then starting court proceedings, bringing the errors of their ways to the attention of the judge, seeking third-party disclosure orders, seeking suspended cost orders, so an order that says, if you don't provide this disclosure by X date, you'll then be liable to pay X amount of money. Those are the sort of steps that we ramp up, unfortunately, in certain cases.
Thank you. A slightly different question now. This one is for both of you, I think, Dom and Ben. So at Pennywise, Pennywise is a company that create and challenge income need schedules or future lifestyle budget estimates. And they're always asked what the best time is for them to be brought in on this. And do you have a view on when the best time might be for, this is another referral out, isn't it, potentially?
Yeah, I don't have experience of working with Pennywise myself. So I don't know what, for example, the cost implications are for the client. So again, we'd have to bear in mind proportionality. If we get presented with a budget and there's some obvious wrong information, someone's claiming that they need £1,000 a month petrol, then it's not necessarily going to take a third party to identify that. So I think it's highly fact specific. Rebecca would need to understand, I would need to understand what the cost implications of it are, before we could then decide at what stage that becomes necessary. It might be that it only becomes necessary later on within the court proceedings, because we might be trying to do a deal and settle the court proceedings without incurring more costs. But then it might become apparent that that's not going to happen. We're going to have to go to a final hearing, and that's when we need this more analytical, forensic scrutiny, as it were. So yeah, I think that's the best answer I can give, Claire.
Yeah, I'd agree. We'd try and work out a budget for Rebecca and sense check it. We work with a lot of clients and work through their expenditure, so we'll know what's likely to be rough sort of costs. But again, if it is needed and another referral is to be made, I think probably at stage 3, like Dominic said, with a negotiation, is likely where that referral may come in. So
yeah, thank you. The next question is it's a really interesting one, actually. How can and what can the court do how does the court ever not approve the consent order? How does it do that, and what happens if it does? I think is the question.
Yeah. So yeah, the court can refuse to approve a consent order, because as I explained in Rebecca's scenario, once we've got a deal, it's then formalised within a consent order and it's sent to a judge to be approved. But it's not a rubber stamp process. The judge has to fulfil a statutory requirement to assess the agreement and decide, is it more or less fair? And sometimes they can say, no, we're concerned this isn't fair. And they can then write to the parties or the lawyers, if they've got lawyers, to say, please explain why this is fair. Because it might be that the judge has maybe misunderstood some aspect of the agreement, and then an explanation can alleviate any concerns that judge has. Ultimately, the court can convene a court hearing to hear from the parties direct and take a much more hands-on approach as to why is this agreement being discussed, and then probably encouraging one party, if it is very unfair, to take legal advice. I've not been involved in a situation beyond that, because part of our role is to make sure, as far as we can, that what's being discussed is fair. But I'm sure that it probably does happen again every day, where judges are being presented with perhaps unfair agreements. So ultimately, they can convene a court hearing and probably persuade a party to take advice and renegotiate.
What might be the same person just asking an extension question? So what might be an example where the court might deem the consent order to be unfair, if you're able to?
Yeah, of course. So hypothetical, let's say Rebecca and Gary have been married for 20 years. They're going to divide their capital equally, but then their pensions, there's no pension share. And then the judge can see that, well, Gary's got a pension worth £1 million and Rebecca's got no pension. The judge will be thinking, it's 20-year marriage, no pension share. The judge knows that there's an expectation that parties' pensions should be equalised, broadly speaking. So that's the situation. They might say, why is there no pension share? Please explain why this is fair.
Thank you. We've just got time for one more question, I think. So this person is saying that the advice about minimising solicitor costs is really helpful, but they've been quite shocked at solicitor costs so far. For example, when the solicitor reads an email and forwards it on, and there's the 6-minute amounts which soon add up. is there any advice about how to view this, and is it just a necessary part of the process? There's one thing here, I think, that actually this helps us to end on quite a positive note around employing a team. When you employ a team and you have somebody like me on that team, you can talk to me about some of the things that you might otherwise be emailing your solicitor about. Some of my clients have fallen into the trap sometimes of involving their solicitor on the more emotional things, or trying to make decisions. And actually, if you've got somebody like me on your team, you can talk those things through. And my charging is very different to Dominic's. So it's not on a 6-minute basis. The way that I work with clients, I always say that they can email me in between. There's no extra cost to that. So some of those discussions are perhaps better had with a coach like me. And then some of those things are perhaps, like we said earlier, add up all your points on one email and send it across, sleep on it overnight, think about whether there are other choices and other people you can talk to about some of those things. Is there anything else, Dom, that you'd like to add?
No, I think that covers most of it. It's firstly having an awareness of how will I be charged. So in that first meeting, hopefully Rebecca would have the confidence. I mean, I proactively address how Rebecca would be charged, but I can't obviously speak for every solicitor in England and Wales. So I think that's a key question before you engage a solicitor, or in that first meeting with a solicitor. How will I be charged for the work beyond this meeting? Okay. Also, a key question is, how can I get the best value from you as well? And I'll be quite frank with people that if I'm getting forwarded multiple emails, then that's when the costs are going to start racking up, because it's more inefficient to have to look through 10 different emails than to deal with one email. Now, life's not always like that. As I said, there can be these exceptions where something's particularly happened and there is an urgent need. So I think that's a key question. How can I get the best value? And Claire, that holistic support, those emotional concerns and queries, I'm not best set up to deal with that. Obviously, I've got an understanding and can do, but that's where actually, if you've got a team, it's better to use your expertise for that, my expertise for legal questions, strategy, Ben's expertise for financial advice. I think, and actually, I think the other aspect, Claire, sorry, I was going to say, is when you've got a team, each one of us is more accountable. Okay, because if I do something, or there's a ridiculous bill, Rebecca's going to mention it to you. You're not daft. You're going to think, what was that for? What's been going on here? And ultimately, you can pick up the phone to me. Or similarly, if I notice something, because I'm quite protective, about my clients, and if they've got a mortgage advisor who said something that doesn't make sense, then, if necessary, I just think it makes people more accountable when there's actually a team and they're not just relying on one professional. You're not placing all of your trust in one professional in this situation.
That's a really good point. Really good point.
Yeah, agreed.
Thank you. We've run out of time. If anybody watching does have further questions, we're going to put up a slide in a minute that's got all of our contact details on, so you can drop us an email to ask further questions and so on. One thing I was going to say earlier is that Dom and I did another webinar last year about how to handle a very challenging ex-partner. So if that's you and you're in that situation, I know we've touched on it today. There are lots more strategies and so on in that webinar, all available on both my website and the Sills and Betteridge website. I said that we'd mention very quickly how to choose members of your team. Look for recommendations. Look at those people's testimonials. My website, for example, has loads of testimonials on it. Look at qualifications. What qualifications does this person have? Have they won any awards? Do they have any accolades? And all of us, I think, offer sort of an initial chat. See how you feel. Do you like the person? You're going to have to spend a lot of time with us. Do you like them? Do you feel you could trust us? Do you feel that you have rapport with us? And I think, Dom, you've done a blog, haven't you, about how to choose your divorce lawyer. So we will share that afterwards as well.
Yeah, I have. So very similar to what you've said, Claire. So speaking, with a trusted family or friend about a recommendation, often a personal recommendation is a good place to start. There's more transparency now. There's lots of review websites out there. So for lawyers, there's a website called Review Solicitors, and that showcases reviews about solicitors. So there's no hiding. Also looking at lawyers' websites and their bios. Read their personal bios. Do they write blogs? What are their interests? What's their specialisms? Have they got any accolades? You'll normally find their qualification there as well. So those would be my top 3: personal recommendations, review websites, and actually reading bios about lawyers you've shortlisted.
Yeah, and look for the tone of the certainly with mine, because my website is just, I've written it and it's just me. So read it through. You can kind of pick up a tone of voice. Do you feel like you like the message that's being given out, those kinds of things too. Ben, anything, just very quickly, anything to add?
No, exactly the same. Just make sure you get on with the person you're working with. I think it's really, really important in this field, and take recommendations and look at reviews and websites. I'm always happy to speak to anyone. There's no initial charges for a chat, so don't feel afraid of just picking up the phone and chatting through your position. We're not going to send you a bill at the end of it. But yeah, I think the key is really make sure you get on with your professional. I know us 3 do, and we want our clients to get on with us all as well.
So thank you very much, Dominic and Ben. I think we've given a huge amount of information in this webinar. I hope that you've taken a lot from it, everybody who's watching, and thank you very much. Please do get in touch if we can help you at all.
Thank you.
Thanks all. Take care.